Hello, I'm glad to be with you again. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Lord's Supper, and we've discussed relative topics about the Lord's Supper in conjunction with Jesus last week and his movements in general in the Passover celebration. But this particular one is just going to look at the Lord's Supper and its mechanics specifically. So some of the material will be reviewed and some will be new. And so I hope you enjoy it. I'll start my PowerPoint presentation now. 3 interesting questions relating to the Last Supper. Where was the upper room? We've talked about that in the past, and now we're going to look a little bit more specifically where it might have been or probably was. What special arrangements needed to be made? Was there a specific seating arrangement? Is this what you generally picture in your mind when you think of the Lord's Supper? This was Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. A little bit more detail there. Some interesting aspects or things about this picture that have a lot of symbolisms that not many people are aware of. And so you might be interested as I review some of them. For instance, this is Judas sitting right here in the green. And you notice one thing about Judas, his head is lower than anyone else's head. And Judas is the only one with his elbow on the table. This is the order they were in. Here's Peter, John, and then Judas specifically. And then there are the remaining 6. We'll look closer at what's going on with Peter, Judas, and John. You notice a mysterious hand there. This is Peter's hand, and he has a knife. Oh, what I wanted to call attention to, and I forgot to, was Andrew has his hands up as if he's being stuck up or something. And this is because that knife is pointing right at him. But it was pointing away from Jesus, and it was behind Judas' back. So it may have symbolized for Leonardo that Judas had a knife behind his back, which turned out to be relatively true. Judas seems to be clutching something. This is believed to have been a pouch, and it may have been a pouch containing the 30 pieces of silver, or it may have been some of the money that they had collected and he was going to go and feed the poor, supposedly. But we don't know particularly. He seems to be reaching for some bread as if he's about to leave and wants to take some food with him. And this is interesting. There is a salt shaker. They didn't have shakers. They had little bowls of salt that you put in, sprinkling with your fingers. But he knocked that over. And that may have been symbolizing the betray the salt, which was a idiom at that time that meant the salt represented your master. And this was a betrayal of the master when you were said to have betrayed your salt. And so that may have been the symbol that Leonardo had in mind when he shows the salt container knocked over. It's an interesting picture, and there's been a lot written about it, but it's not accurate. Traditionally, festive eatings involved a triclinium table, and triclinium's a 3-sided table, and clinium meaning to recline. We'll review some of the scriptural and historical sources for more detail. Mark 14:13 through 16. Jesus said to 2 of the disciples, "Go into the city where you will find, or you will meet a man carrying a jar of water. Follow him. And when he goes into a house, say to the owner, 'Our teacher wants to know if you have a room where he can eat the Passover meal with his disciples. The owner will take you upstairs and show you a large room furnished and ready for you to use. Prepare the meal there. The two disciples went into the city and found everything just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover meal. 4 questions to answer. Who is the man with the jar of water? Where were they likely to have met him? Where was the upper room? And what special preparations were needed? 3 reasons why the jar of water man was an Essene monk. The Essenes were celibate monks, not all of them, but it's believed that this group was. There were at least 50 living in Jerusalem during Jesus' ministry, according to Josephus. Tradition locates the upper room in the Essene community, and so that's a real strong tradition. And the Essenes are associated with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Their Dead Sea Scrolls were with Khirbet Qumran, where they were believed to have been authored by Essenes that lived in that location. This was on the west bank of the Jordan River. And you know the story of these scrolls. They're so elaborate in the details and have done a great deal to substantiate the accuracy of the Bible. Who were the Essenes? Josephus says the Essenes are despisers of riches, and so very communal as to earn our admiration, according to Josephus. There is no one to be found among them who has more than another, for they have a law that those who come to join them must let whatever they have be in common to the whole order, so that among them all there is no appearance of either poverty or excessive wealth. Their views of wealth parallel Jesus' views of wealth. So who is the man with the jar of water? Mark 14:13, Jesus said to the 2 disciples, "Go into the city where you will meet a man carrying a jar of water. Follow him." Why would a man be carrying water and be easily identified? Why would he be easily identified? Well, mainly because the men don't carry water. Usually slaves or women carry water, and a man carrying water would be outstanding. And so that's the reason why we assume that this was an Essene monk, because they were not associated with women. So all the men did women's chores. And in fact, this particular gate is the gate of the Essenes, and it was cut into the wall by the Essene monks. I guess they got permits and everything and were allowed to make this wall special. The reasons being is because they took daily ritual baths and full body submersion baptism. And there were also latrines outside where they could dispose of their waste. This is the Essene quarter. And later, after Jesus was resurrected and the Christianity began to flourish in Jerusalem, this became the Christian community. And there is the location of the upper room, according to many sources. Luke 22:10, Jesus told them, "As you go into the city, you will meet a man carrying a jar of water. Follow him into the house." Follow him. So this would be the way that he would be traveling to and from this upper room, or this large building with the upper room. Apparently they did much of their ritualistic cleansing in that particular building. And Jesus knew this, and so it was easy for him to identify how the disciples could find where they were going to eat the evening meal or the Passover meal. Essenes were Baptists. They took ritual baths daily in a mikveh. Bath pools, they were outside the walls. The gate of the Essenes was cut into the existing wall by the Essenes. There was likely a steady stream of men with jars on their heads carrying water, going to and from the mikvah back to the building that we pointed out. It is implied that the men was by a gate. Mark 14:13 says, go into the city. Well, you know, when you go into the city, you have to go in through a gate. You go into the city by means of a gate. Luke 22:10, as you go into the city, when you have entered the city, those two expressions were used. And so, again, we can conclude that there was a gate that they would go to and knew about. And Jesus said, go to that gate. And then when you see a man with a jar of water on his head, follow him. Luke says, as or when you go into the city, which also implies a gate. Using an Essene guest room implies a traditional Passover meal. Originally, the Israelites were commanded to eat the Passover quickly. Exodus 12:11 and 12. When you eat the meal, be dressed and ready to travel. Have your sandals on, carry your walking stick in your hand, and eat quickly. This is the Passover festival in honor of me, your Lord. That same night I will pass through Egypt and kill the firstborn son in every family and the firstborn male of all animals. I am the Lord, and I will punish the gods of Egypt. That only applied to the original Passover, because that all happened just once in the haste to leave Egypt at that time. By Jesus' day, the room wherein you ate the Passover had to be prepared in advance. Mark 14:15 and 16. He will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there. The disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. Aside from the disciples providing the lamb, what else had to be done to the room? Not necessarily by the disciples, but the room had already been furnished and ready. First of all, no leaven was allowed. According to the law, Exodus 12:14 and 15, this is a day you are to commemorate for generations to come. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. For 7 days you are to eat bread made without yeast. On the first day remove the yeast from your house. For whosoever eats anything with yeast in it, from the first day through the 7th, must be cut off from Israel. It's a pretty severe penalty. Exodus 13:7. Eat unleavened bread during those 7 days. Nothing with yeast in it is to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere within your borders. What is a feather, spoon, and candle used for? After they do all through the house and clean all the yeast out, they even needed special tools to get some of the yeast out from the cracks of the floor. And the house was thoroughly cleaned on the 13th of Nisan. But then at the end of that cleaning period, the children would hide crumbs in the room. And then there was a ceremony that they conducted with their father. Using one candle, children played hot cold with father until all the crumbs were found. You know what hot cold is. I mean, they were, you're getting warm, you're getting warm. No, you're getting cold, getting cold. So by that process, father was able to find all the crumbs. And those he found, he sweeps the crumbs into a wooden spoon using the feather. And this has become a tradition, and it's still practiced today. What is the prayer of nullification? Father recites this prayer after having done or found all of the hidden crumbs. He recites this prayer. Any leaven and leavening which is in my possession, and which I have neither seen nor destroyed, or known of, is to be as naught, and as ownerless as the dust of the earth. Ownerless means it's not possessed by anyone. Therefore, just as the dust is not possessed by anyone. And so that prayer of nullification was the final prayer that the Father said to God in support of his making every effort to remove all leaven from the house. Next morning, that prayer is repeated as the feather, wood, wooden spoon, and any leaven that turned up during the search are burned, thus ending the process of nullification. Now, this is a modern picture, and it's still done today, as far as I know. I've never attended or seen anything like this, but according to the sources I've read, it still happens even today. You see a picture there of them burning the feather, wooden spoon, and leaven. During their captivity, Israelites encountered alternate methods of eating. Particularly, Esther 1:5-6 says King Xerxes soon gave another dinner and invited everyone in the city of Susa, no matter who they were. The eating and drinking lasted 7 days in the beautiful palace gardens. Couches of gold and silver rested on the pavement that had all kinds of designs made from costly, bright-colored stones and marble and mothers of pearl. This is the couches of gold and silver are the key points there, because that has then come down through history and is still remnants of that particular or what they did then is still was practiced in Jesus' day and is still being practiced today. Wealth and freedom became associated with reclining when eating. Passover reclining symbolized independence and freedom from Egyptian slavery. Jesus apparently followed this tradition in celebrating the Passover. Also, such festive eating included a seating arrangement. Luke states that Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table. They left and found things just as Jesus had told them, so they prepared the Passover. When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table. Today, in Jewish families, they sit in chairs. They don't recline, but each chair has a pillow in it to symbolize the reclining position. Jesus stressed the importance of seating arrangements. You may recall in Luke 14:8-9, when you're invited to a wedding feast, don't sit in the best place. Someone more important may have been invited. Then the one who invited you will come and say, give your place to this other guest. You will be embarrassed and you will have to sit in the worst place. So that was an advice, but it also indicated that there were best and worst places to sit in an arrangement like this. The best and worst places were traditional locations. A closer look at the Triclinium Table and the Last Supper. Tri means 3 and clinium means to recline. In this picture, it's erroneous insofar as it has women doing servicing the tables, but there would have been no women at this time. There may have been men servicing, or the apostles themselves were the ones that did the servicing. For instance, that food that was a part of the preparation. And Jesus said to his disciples, 2 disciples, go and prepare the place. They brought the food, and they probably laid it out in these positions as you see them illustrated in this picture. Then the one that was to be able to lift the food from there to the table may have been a servant in the household, or it may have been one of the apostles that was what we'd call the least one. The apostles that night may have been the one to perform that service. There was a traditional seating arrangement. Remember, Jesus referenced 2 positions. Tradition references 4 positions. Evidently, Jesus followed this custom. This seating arrangement comes to us through non-biblical sources, however. However, Jesus implied the traditional seating arrangement, as we will discuss in more detail. We will receive a review of the scriptures for confirmation. There's the host bowl and there's the host where the host sat. The way the descriptions are given in the scriptures, this is the assumption we can come to. Some people would say, well, why didn't he sit at the end of the table? Well, if he'd sat at the end of the table, certain events that are described in the scriptures would not have been likely. So we'll assume, and according to tradition, that is the host's position. And then there's the guest of honor, and that he sat just next to Jesus. And then there's the favorite. He sat to the right of Jesus, and in the favorite position. And then there's the last position. That's what I referred to earlier, that he went and took one of the more prestigious positions, and then were asked to move. You might be moved to that last location and be very embarrassed by that. The host, we will assume that this is the host position as tradition dictates. So that's Jesus. In John 13:23, Jesus' favorite disciple was sitting next to him at the meal. We know that to be John, who was his favorite disciple. And then John 13:24, and Simon motioned that the favorite disciple to the favorite disciple to find out which one Jesus meant. Jesus had just announced that there was a traitor amongst them, and so that's what John is saying that Peter did. And see, he had to have been sitting there to be able to motion to John favorably like that in order to make inquiry as to who was the one that Jesus referred to. So we can assume that's Peter in the last position. And maybe he would have been the ones to distribute the food. I don't know. Luke 22:23 and 24. Then the apostles started arguing about who would ever do such a thing. This is betray Jesus. And following that, the apostles got into an argument about which one of them was greatest. Surprising indeed. John 13:26, Jesus answered, I will dip this piece of bread in the sauce and give it to the one I was talking about. Now he's saying this to John, and so John has firsthand knowledge of what Jesus was saying. Then Jesus dipped the bread and gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. So for Judas to have received that sop, he would have had to have been sitting next to Jesus in the place of honor. How ironic. Matthew 26:21 and 23. Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, surely not I, Rabbi. Jesus answered, said, yes, it is you. Now again, the rest of the disciples didn't hear that, except maybe one. Matthew is the only writer that records this conversation between Jesus and Judas. So we can assume that maybe Matthew was sitting there in that position because he could hear firsthand what Jesus said to Judas, and the rest still were not aware. Luke 22:22, and the Son of Man will die in the way that has been decided for him, but it will be terrible for the one who betrays him. Matthew 27:5. Judas threw the money into the temple and then went out and hanged himself. So Judas certainly was regrettable for what he had done, and he died a horrible death. So this is the way we think of the table of the Lord's Supper looked. So what do you think? Now we all know what we have yet to look forward to. What is that? What we have to look forward to? Matthew 8:11, and I say unto you that many shall come from the east and the west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. That's an interesting statement because they're going to be eating in the kingdom of heaven. I don't know if people have that in mind or not as far as what goes on in the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 26:29. From now on, I am not going to drink any wine until I drink new wine with you in my Father's kingdom. Now again, there's wine in the kingdom. So wine comes from grapes unless they have a machine to make wine. Jesus made wine out of water, so I don't know what kind of wine. He says new wine. That's an interesting thought, that there will be no doubt eating and drinking in heaven. Well, thank you very much for attending. I appreciate this time I've spent with you, and I look forward to seeing you again.